So it looks like the recording is in progress, and now I want to officially open this webinar on vector symbolic architectures and hyperdimensional computing. And today it is my turn to present. So I feel a little bit weird to present myself, but nevertheless, I will talk about recent results I and my collaborators obtained and published on arXiv. It is about using vector symbolic architectures in the context of unsupervised manifold learning. So let me start sharing the screen. And no, I want to share the full screen. So do you see my slides now? Okay, good. Yes, and actually, so I admit that maybe the title is a little bit too ambitious, and I hope it's not very misleading. But with the help of this algorithm, well, first of all, when I having the idea of this algorithm, I had in mind this major postulates or statements of vector symbolic architectures, and specifically two of them that repeats that are getting repeated in every kind of method section of VSA related paper. That on the one hand, VSA have great expressiveness, algorithmic expressiveness, and secondly is that VSA and hyperdimensional computing have potential for implementing general AI. And then this later statement can be in turn broken down into several sub items. And throughout the talk, I want to reiterate on some of them. But the core of the talk is this new algorithm, which we named Hyperseed, and that we have developed together with my collaborators. Let me introduce them one by one. So we have actually a very international team. Me being in Sweden, and the core of the group is sitting in Melbourne. But the curious fact about our team is that both universities have same acronym. So my university is LTU, is for Luleå Technical University, and La Trobe University is LTU in Melbourne. So my collaborators are three PhD students, Sachin, Delante, Timal, and on the senior side we have Daminda Alhakoun and Dasvinder Silva. They are known for their contribution to the domain of unsupervised learning using self-organizing maps. And specifically, Daminda some time ago suggested so-called growing self-organized maps, and Dasvin is looking at analyzing concept drifts using using a special kind of self-organized maps. Finally, a very important role was played by Ben Escleco, who is a postdoctoral fellow at UC Berkeley at this moment. What is to be presented in this talk? So, in my eyes, this is an instance of a really great algorithmic expressiveness of vector symbolic architectures. So, having in mind a really rather complex learning algorithm, so we were able to functionally implement it using simple operations of VSA. Also, for the first time, we will show how VSA and connecting to the one of the previous talks given by Fritz Sommer, so vector functional architectures using fractional power encoding, how these frameworks could be used for manifold learning, unsupervised manifold learning. And this is done under the umbrella of a novel algorithm, which we named Hyperseed. So throughout the talk, I will explain a little bit about the origin of this name. But it's a novel algorithm which is entirely based on VSA operations, starting from data encoding to the core operations to the interpretation. And I hope you would appreciate this combination of VSA operations in this context, and specifically, so you would appreciate the power of binding that we, well, at least to the best of my knowledge, wasn't kind of exploited and explored until now. I also immediately want to say that so this algorithm was developed as part of a project funded by Intel Neuromorphic Research Lab. I will introduce this project a little bit later. And as such, from the beginning, it is tailored for implementation on neuromorphic hardware. And while showcasing the performance of the algorithm, I will try to address these 4 issues that kind of, well, I address some of the important points of this postulate of, that VSAs are suitable for implementing general AI. So we will be talking about learning from few examples. We will show how VSA could be used as a symbolic interface to human, well, in the context of interactive exploration of data analytics scenario. Also, I will address the potential of this architecture for context-based learning of representations and potential of learning compositional hypervectors without constructing them from atomic ones. And again, so please feel free to interrupt me if you feel like asking a question, like technical question, or we can take it after the end. But in any case, please take into account that this is rather ongoing work, heavily ongoing work. So, and these issues I bring to you mainly for discussions rather as a kind of final results. Preliminaries, very, very quickly going through the slides. I know that we all know the basics of VSAs, but again, so the most important moments that will be used in the algorithm. First of all, so I want you to tune your mind to the wavelength of rather classical unsupervised unsupervised learning. So in this case, we have data with some unknown similarity distribution, unknown composition of classes, etc. And we input it through, I mean, as a set of features to one or another machine learning solver. So this is a classical path or pipeline for this. And again, so more specifically, so the most relevant techniques to what I'm going to present functionally would be TSNE for unsupervised data visualization. Well, again, the detailed comparison is part of the ongoing research. So most of the comparison is done to actually the conceptually closest one, self-organizing maps. And again, so on a very high level of abstraction, so we know that VSAs have been heavily used to represent input data to many classical machine learning solvers, like neural networks of different kinds. In this project, we investigated a problem of implementing unsupervised learning and, well, specifically tailored to NLP tasks. And using recently proposed implementations of associative memory on spiking hardware from Intel, amongst others. I will come back to this later. So again, very quickly, for demonstration purposes, I will be using FHRR, so complex VSAs. And again, so I will address why a bit later on. We also have implementation on HRR. And here again, so these are the main operations. Binding element-wise multiply, unbinding element-wise multiply with complex conjugate. And permutation can be implemented in different ways. And the similarity measure would be in Cartesian mode is a cosine similarity of real parts of the vectors. This is, oh, sorry. This is very important again. So this is very new. This is very known and basic knowledge in VSA, but that is apparently what we are using in our algorithm. That's well, talking about binding and bundling. Binding is invertible, so you can unbind one of the operands using the unbinding operation. So that binding preserves similarity. So this is well known. So if you multiply two similar vectors with, say, with a given randomly generated hypervector, so the result will be randomized but similar in this new basis. So connected to this, binding is randomizing. So basically binding it with orthogonal vector, so creates a dissimilar vector. And obviously, so binding can be recovered from the superposition. So you have a superposition and then you unbind the noisy version. So that's so far so good, right? The very important preliminary. Fractional power encoding and what Fritz has presented last time, vector functional architectures. Again, I will not go into details of it. So here I'm using only the encoding part, the representational part. So in this context, so we have a grid of a 2D area to encode using hypervectors. And we start off with initialization vectors that are unit vectors with phases taken from a uniform distribution. And then, so each coordinate, to get each coordinate, so we have an iteration step along X and Y axis, and we have this parameter, so epsilon, which is the which regulates the similarity between the vectors of X and Y components. And actually, finally, the XY coordinate is represented by bundling corresponding XY and YY vectors. And more details you can find well in these two articles, and also the first works on fractional power encoding is dated back to Tony Plate's work. And here is what we have as a result if we plot similarity of a chosen hypervector to all other hypervectors in this HD plane. Or further on, I will call it HD map. So it looks like I need to disable some microphone for some of you. Yeah, like this. And maybe even I will mute Dennis. Yes, this is how it looks, the 3D similarity profile for the 2D HD map. So I want to stay a little bit more on this topic, and now I want you to have a visual kind of representation of or a visual feeling of how similarity looks like for different values of this epsilon of the exponent for x and y axis. So this is how it looks for a small epsilon, so that you have a similarity that kind of smoothly decays over the large number of nodes. And in contrast, so this is a picture you get when you generate a 2D map or HD map with a larger epsilon parameter. And also, again, so I don't want to go into much more details about this larger figures on the right, but just for future reference, if we have 2 points located at the edge of the similarity. So here, so on the lower left graph, so we have a similarity distribution, so to say, for a hypervector corresponding to a point with coordinates 50-50. And so at the coordinate 150-50, so it goes virtually to 0. So it means that these 2 points are dissimilar. And if we place these 2 points on the HD map, so this would be a kind of a joint similarity heat map, so to say. And so in contrast, so for an HD map with a larger exponent, so you see that the effect from the 2 nodes, so they is only in the direct vicinity of these nodes, right? Somewhere in between. So there is no influence from these 2 points. So let me first give you an idea behind the Hyperseed algorithm. So it is, well, the details you can find in a paper that we published on an archive. But here is the high level idea behind it. So on the one hand, we have our data samples encoded in VSA, which with unknown class structure, unknown inner similarity, etc. On the other hand, so we will generate our HD map, so, or well, here I call it a projection lattice, using fractional power encoding, as I have described previously. And this map over here will remain fixed for the lifetime of the algorithm. So we never change the patterns here. So with Hyperseed, or what Hyperseed does, it projects points from the data domain onto the HD map. So encoded using fractional power encoding. And this projection is done using some projection function. So you take a data, so you apply the function, and you get a point on this map. So what we want is that this transformation function, f of d, that it should preserve the similarity within D inside P. So let me take a short pause so that you can digest a little bit this information. So now we need to find this transformation function. And actually, what we will use as a transformation function is a bundle of bindings. So what we will do, we will, as part of the algorithm functionality, we will iteratively select data points from D and bind it to certain points in P. And we will collect these bindings inside vector S, which we call seed. So in a way, we will seed certain values, certain points or samples, data samples from D onto HD map P. And then, during the inference phase, so to say, so we will take any point or any sample from D and determine in its position on P by unbinding this data from S. Okay. So this is the core of the algorithm. So the learning will happen here in a way. So how this data samples are selected and how this projection vector or seed vector is constructed. So some ideas about how to find the update points. And here I want you now to recall this visual representations of the similarity distribution for different between points on HD maps generated with different values for similarity exponent epsilon. So we start with taking, well, virtually whatever random data point and whatever and any point in P and bind them together and bind them basically. And then we start to iterate through the data set. Well, now I'm presenting it as a kind of operations on offline available data, but I mean, this iteration could be substituted by actually observation of incoming data in online learning scenarios. So you iterate through the available data and find such sample D that after unbinding from S results in the minimum similarity to any point in D. So in other words, we are seeking the farther away projection from one of the use points. I mean, on the first step from the point that we generated for the first data sample. And when we found this D, we want to bind it to a point dissimilar to the previously discovered one. So now, what does it mean? Actually, in practice, if we have large epsilons, so it is kind of safe just to randomly generate points on this HD map. So exactly because of this effect, when we, that this similarity is not kind of propagated on long distances from a given point, so we can safely select any point on the on HD map. And for smaller exponents, the placement of points could be part of the design. I will explain you a little bit later. So how we can place these updates, these points. But what do we achieve with this step? Is actually that we will, as a result, we will proportionally we will proportionally transform the distances from D to the chosen distance scale in P. And actually, so this epsilon parameter, as well as the size of the grids, are the hyperparameters of our algorithm. So again, a little bit of intuition behind this kind of this updates rules. When you bind to orthogonal hypervectors or to dissimilar hypervectors in P, which will make them very strong attractors for data points similar to data hypervectors used for binding when binding to this point. And that's why, so you can, well, not that's why, but I mean, it will work when, I mean, the exact placement of nodes is not very relevant in this case. So as you will see, so it achieves its goal, but on the downside, so this kind of placement is not very useful for visualization. So you may see some randomly placed points of attraction, so to say. The only limitation, or a very important limitation in this case, is that remember that so we will collect all the bindings in a bundle, so which we call seed vector, and obviously the number of bindings inside this bundle should be small enough to introduce to not introduce too much noise when unbinding, during the unbinding operation. And this is related to the capacity for a given dimensionality. As for the smaller exponents, so this placement, so you remember this case when, so this placement satisfies our criteria that 2 points are placed on nodes with very low similarity, on orthogonal nodes with respect to each other. And in this case, so an attraction field will be created between them two. So these nodes will equally attract data which are similar to them, which will, as you will see later, will result in interesting effect during the visualization. So now I want to go through illustrative use cases or demonstrations of algorithm functionality. So to demonstrate that it works, first of all, so we run a very kind of interesting experiment. So we selected this kind of known synthetic data sets, which are normally used in the context of self-organized maps in order to check the quality of the projection. And also, in addition to the visual quality, we will check the classification accuracy. So we will, in a way, how normally classification is done using self-organized maps. So we will label the hits on the map for each data point, and then we will use these labels to classify the unseen examples from the test set. So, so this second row shows the result of classical SOM. So on a 100 by 100 grid. So for these different data, and the data, so the data is very simple actually. So it's 2 or 3D or 2 or 3 feature dimensional feature vectors arranged in this kind of topology, and we used simple techniques to encode it into hypervectors. So we have some quantization levels for each of the features, and then we bundle them. So each feature vector is a bundle of corresponding levels in each for each feature. So, and in this experiment, we actually did a single update. So meaning that, so we selected a random data sample and bound it to a point on HD map. And then we just projected the remaining data onto HD map, and the results, so the visual representation of it. So you see in the row below, on the lowest row over here. So you see that we have a very adequate projections. We can receive very adequate projections for this simple data with even a single update. So, and this actually is not a surprise because what we are using here is essentially the property of similarity preservation of binding operation. So we know we generated the HD map with the known similarity properties, and we bind the data samples to the points in this data structure. And apparently, well, again, as I said, so this in this way, this data is very simple, so that even a single update results in pretty good visualization. So not all data or real world data is much more complex than that, and complexity comes with respect to the distance, to the distribution of distances, inter-class distances and in-class distances for a given problem. So the next demonstration is actually what we did within the project. So I mean, as a use case, we have a language classification task where we have 21 European languages, so texts collected from news, and we encode the text using Engram Statistics. I'm not going into detail for doing that. The only differences that we are, I mean, from this paper is that we are using FHRR or HRR, so depending on the version. And then Engram Statistics is a bundle of 3 symbol bindings when you scan a given text. Okay, so let's see. And in this first example, so that's these are the graphs from the article. So we use rather large exponents, and we do kind of random updates or we pick random points on HD map for binding data samples. And what you see here is that, so the graph on the left show the accuracy, the classification accuracy for the case of 21 languages and after 21 updates. So in a way that we have a single seed vector of, in this case, dimensionality of 5,000, in which we bundle 21 bindings, so 21 samples that we found according to the procedure I described before. And then, so you see that, I mean, for some small number of classes, the accuracy is rather good, but then it quickly decays. And this is the effect of the capacity, so that we add more bindings that when we unbind a given point, so since so we get a too noisy representation of a hypervector from HD map. This can be solved by, well, in general, extending the dimensionality. But again, not. I mean, this can be done in different ways. Where what we did here, we used several seed vectors instead, and kept the number of bundlings in each of them kind of small, so that they operate below the capacity. And in this way, so you could come very close to the corresponding accuracy of the traditional sum in only, well, it's in substantially smaller number of iterations. Now, what I want to show you is something which can be which can be seen as a work in progress. So using this architecture as in an interactive way, so to explore the data and to see, see the interesting visualization effect. So this is again our language classification task. What we will do. So first we project, well, in this case, just to keep it not, to avoid too messy visualization. So I choose only 14 languages to begin with. And the idea is that, our HD map, well, in essence, is just a collection of hypervectors. But the fact that we have generated them using 2D lattice allows a kind of very nice interaction capabilities. So, and to demonstrate it, so I just I kind of emulate this process, showing you the series of figures in MATLAB. So we are working on, more interactive online version of it. So in this case, you see a projection of 14 languages after 4 updates only. And the updates are done in the on distances, as I said, that the update points are located on just on the edge of this similarity distribution for a selected node. So what we can see. So first of all, so we have so the coloring is done when labeling. So we do have the labels, and so we color it after the algorithm finishes its updates. So we see that it's kind of messy, but we already see some kind of interesting distinct clusters that emerge from the data. And of course, I mean, after 4 updates, the manifold of these languages is very complex. I mean, the 2D map is very restrictive in this way to immediately visualize the interclass similarity. But what we can do now, we can say, okay, so show me the separation in this messy cluster. So we select this region, and now all the data that hit the hypervectors on the HD map in this region would be directed further to the next level analysis, or a next level projection. And that's what we see. So now I will speed up my presentation. So, if we see the projection of only this selected data, then we see, okay, so new clusters like clean clusters have appeared. And if we see here, it's German and English, so which is kind of different from, I mean, it all makes sense, right? So it's kind of, it's semantically meaningful separation, but still, I mean, this separation is kind of messy. So we can again do the same step. So now we will filter out or we will redirect the data that hit hypervectors in this area and project them onto the next level SOM. And that's what we'll see. So this would be 3rd level SOM. So what we see here, so we have Bulgarian and Greek is separated. And then, so we have certain arrangement of other languages. Already at this point, we could be happy because you see, even visual analysis reveals that it's kind of semantically meaningful. So French is close to Italian, and then so Latvian and Lithuanian, they are very well, they're close to each other. But again, so if you want to see further separation, so you can again select this region, direct data to the next level, Hyperseed, and then what you see is basically separation of this kind. So now we have French and Italian as a clear clusters, and so Latvian and Lithuanian, forming more or less clear clusters as well. So this is an example of kind of manual data exploration using Hyperseed as in an interactive mode, using HD map as a symbolic interface for interaction. So next, so let me see. So I'm soon to be finished. So we have more kind of iterative algorithm, so automatic algorithm which explores this property. And so this is, for example, a result on yet another data set, which is human activity recognition. So we have a set of 561 feature vectors with time and frequency domain variables, which correspond to different kind of static and dynamic activities like walking upstairs, sitting, standing, laying. And so we run it recursively, like with 4 levels of recursion. So essentially, while in the interactive mode, I kind of manually selected a certain region. Here we, so the algorithm focuses on data that hits specific update nodes. So we update only 4 nodes on the map, and then we select all the data that hits a specific update node for further demonstration. And then, so you see that when increasing the number of the depth of the recursion, so to say, so you are able to increase the accuracy. But already on the first layer, you see meaningful separation between static and dynamic activities. So at the end, so what we currently, for example, see that we obtain an accuracy which is pretty much similar to what classical SOM would obtain after many iterations, actually. So now I want to finish my presentation, maybe speculating a little bit. So maybe presenting a certain proposition. So I hope, don't judge me too hard, but I hope it would, at least I hope to receive a feedback, but I hope for good discussions about it. So so in this framework, so my proposition is that on certain level of hierarchy, stable clusters could be assigned a distinct symbol. And well, since these points over here, these are hypervectors essentially. So you can create kind of associations to a randomly generated symbol that would generate, would mean Swedish, for example, or Polish or whatever. And in this way, so this representation, so which is kind of symbolic representation or orthogonal representation, would be grounded through this kind of unsupervised learning algorithm. And at the end, so it would enable kind of analogical mapping. So I will not go into the details of that. Contextual learning. So if you think about it, so this structure over here, HD map, so it's not task specific. So these are just hypervectors randomly generated with a given property. What we do actually, so we learn the mapping from manifold corresponding to certain task onto this plane. And in this way, I mean, if we have means to distinguish the context, for example, we analyzing texts versus flowers, like iris dataset versus human activities. So then we can think of having associative memory, where we associate the context to a specific seed vector that is learned to project data onto this memory structure. And then in order to differentiate the symbols, we can use the same context vector, by binding it with the resultant symbol. And in this way, we will produce lots of context-dependent symbols. So actually, I mean, so this is the way to generate masses of symbols using the same, I mean, very limited set of basic symbols. As I said, so now I just want to briefly make a link to the neuromorphic hardware. So in our case, it is a Intel's Loihi chip. But I mean, the whole idea for this algorithm came from the availability and good performance of memory-like structures like KNN or TPAM that was proposed by Paxson and his collaborators over the past 2 years. So basically, you can train a reference base of samples, whatever images or whatever, and then you can implement the dot product in spiking neural nets. So essentially determining the best match. And what we do here, we actually, I mean, so our HD map, our stable HD map will be generated and encoded once for good in such a block. And it will be used for a very quick search, almost in constant time, to when we ask to project a certain point on HD map. So by this, I want to finish my presentation. So what I have presented is a new algorithm for unsupervised learning. And just to reiterate again, so I, at least for myself, I kind of confirmed for myself that indeed VSA have very great expressiveness. Having in mind algorithms, so I did, so this part of the story is hidden from this presentation, but I had certain algorithm in mind using VSA, so it resulted, so its functional operation resulted as they appear to be. And in this algorithm, we are using only native VSA operations. And I also, again, to raise certain discussions, I made certain statements about capabilities of VSAs to create this kind of symbolic interface while interacting with VSA-like algorithm. For humans, talked about context-based learning, context-based representations, as well as a possibility of learning compositional representations using, learning compositional representations without constructing them from atomic hypervectors. So that is it. So now I'm open for your comments, questions, feedback, or critique. Thank you.
Evgeny.
Yes.
A really dumb, low-down technical question. When you were talking about the algorithm, you were saying that you choose a value in the map, which was the map corpus P, as the least similar, the most distant. And that sounds relatively hard, but I'm wondering how sensitive is the result to that choice of, does it absolutely have to be the furthest away point, or anything that's not particularly similar will do? Or?
No. Actually, that's an important question. Thank you. So I will show you the effect immediately. So it's not that, as I said, so there are two choices. I mean, you have two options here. Let me, keep on sharing the screen. So the two options here are, well, you need to anchor kind of the points from the data domain to nodes in P, right? And the only thing I said is that during this procedure, so you choose a D, which kind of most distant after unbinding to any vector in P. And the logic behind the further steps is that, well, what we want to control this distance, and so there are two ways of doing that. So you either just randomly place the node, so it immediately. So if you have large exponents, so it immediately satisfies this criteria, or for grids with smaller exponents. So this becomes very sensitive. So if you place it too near each other, then you will not see any separation between data. If you place these points far away, so then essentially you will converge to this upper case. But if you place these nodes on the edge of the similarity distribution for example, with respect to this node, right? So here is the end. So this point is the kind of nearest dissimilar point with respect to this one. Then you kind of scale all the distances from D to the distances between these two vectors. And due to this, you get this nice visualization effect that you start to see that the similar nodes or similar samples, they become placed on semantically meaningful in semantically meaningful places. So what happens if you, for example, choose this update point to be far away, then you will see, a clear distinction between these two clusters. Yes, in this case, but not necessarily. So there are cases when this class in the middle, it has similarity both to, to several classes. And in this case, they will be kind of separated. But again, so it's as I said, it's a hyperparameter. So you choose it depending on what you want.
Okay. Another rather simple question, but yeah. I was wondering, what is the effect of, since you're selecting data points randomly, what happens if you take two data points from the same class and map them to distant points on P? Does it mean that you have then kind of two clusters for the same class that can be joined later?
No, actually, well, a good question. Good question, indeed. So let me see if I have this case on. Let me see. Sometimes it happens, definitely. As I said, so for visualization purposes, it doesn't. It's not very meaningful. So the clusters will not be. The clusters will not be joining at any time, but they will serve as an attractors to this subset of samples belonging to this class.
Got it. Thank you.
But for example, this is in the case when you choose just random placement. If you choose, for example, in this case, so we observe several cases when, for example, 2 or even 3 corners 2 or even 3 corners were updated for by the instances of the same class. In this case, you would see a kind of a shape. So a cluster, I mean, would stretch along these 3 points over here, and all other clusters will arrange somewhere in the middle. So you may have different effects, visual effects of it, but definitely, so in this case with smaller exponents, you will see kind of coherent clusters.
Got it. Thank you.
Evgeny, a couple of questions. One is, so I see you're using the manifold possibilities, the continuous manifold possibilities of the FHRRs. Are you using the ability to have recursive bindings at all? I didn't think I saw that in your examples here.
In which sense?
So that
can you clarify?
That you can bind things into a concept, but then you could bind that concept in with another role into another concept and like that.
Well, we didn't experiment with this kind of data. So, but I mean, if this kind of complex data structures, VSA encoded data structures, and then I may imagine so kind of ontologies. So if they exhibit similarity, certain similarity clustering, so then, well, again, I can only suggest that you will see them as well here. I mean, on this 2D map. But so the current focus is raw sensory data, maybe the data after processing, so extracting features encoding to VSA, or any kind of encoding procedure, and projecting them for visualization and classification on HD map.
Okay. Okay, and a technical question about how you were using the actual vectors when you were binding and bundling in the FHRR space. Were you using unit magnitude, or were you letting the magnitudes vary?
Yeah, good question. So we first of all, so initially it was all unit magnitudes. I mean, the input is unit magnitude. However, I mean, during the update phases, so we let magnitudes grow, but at the end of the operation, we can make it unit length again. So, but not after each step. So if you do it after each step, each update, then so it doesn't work the same well.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. Because if you do it internally too much, it becomes very order dependent.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And then another question: your English of Sweden example.
Yeah.
So, what were you doing there? Were you using like an inverse binding operation to find that, or were you sort of identifying a cluster of points on the map as being sort of corresponding to a language concept?
Exactly. So this is the more of a second kind. So in this example, so I assume that there is a kind of maybe external process of marking. Oh, sorry, it's wrong. Yes, like this. So, this is the clustering that you get. So, I mean, before coloring, you don't know what they are. But again, so coloring is an external agreement that one or another, say, sample of text belongs to a certain language. And then basically, so after labeling, after the labeling step, so you can take all these hypervectors and well, associate it with say a distinct randomly generated vector. So at least in, I mean, that's what I had in mind.
Okay. So what are the points on this figure?
So those are hypervectors, produced or generated by fractional power encoding to encode this 2D lattice, in this case 30 by 30.
Okay, and then what are they? You're mapping from one space to another, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you take original data, so you don't know what it is. Maybe later on, so you know the labels for each of the data that you project. So you take a data, you unbind a hypervector from seed vector, so the one that you learned during the learning phase, and so these points belonging to this vector, so they start to hit this area consistently.
But what were the points in your original data? Were they utterances or what?
Those are, well, the raw data are sentences in 21 languages. And so they are encoded to VSA using Engram Statistics. So you parse the text. Like in this case are 3 grams. So you construct 3 grams for each 3-letter combination, and for a given sentence or a set of sentences, you bundle these Engrams together, and the resulting vector is used. Approximates Engram Statistics for the language. And then you input this encoded sentences, or you use it to learn the projection.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I had another follow-up question. I was wondering if there's any way to preserve inter-class similarity with these types of mappings, because it seems like by choosing random points to bind your class examples to on the HD map, you would lose some of the spatial similarity in terms of like within your HD space, the relations, as you said, the relations between classes aren't really reflective of the data. Is there any way to capture, like, you know, like having, because clearly there are some semantic relations, like you showed with the Lithuania and Italian and French examples, but I'm wondering how the interclass similarity between points is preserved.
Interclass, within a single
between
class.
Different classes. Sorry, not within the between the different classes within the data.
But it is preserved. It is preserved thanks to the due to the similarity preservation property of unbinding. So I mean, the whole principle is that so when you, I mean, whatever similar points you have in the original domain, they should map to a similar constellation of points in the target domain. So,
okay.
So, for example, look. For example, on this picture is kind of illustrative. Why? Because in this case, we had 4 updates, but we have 7 languages, right? And so here we have, so green is Czech, blue is Bulgarian, so the Slavic languages, French, well, is purple, and Swedish and German, black and red. So importantly, so this red, purple, and blue, they were never updated. I mean, they are not part of the seed vector. So what you have in the bundle, you have 4 bindings. One for, Polish, one for English, one for Czech, and one for Swedish. So these are the crosses of the corresponding color. And so this graph illustratively shows that the inner similarity between classes is correctly projected to the 2D, to the HD map. So, and that's why, the data points of French, they consistently hit this purple region over here. So they cannot hit anywhere, in another place. So, and that is what is the main principle behind this algorithm. So by using binding, or, I talked to some other people, so they said maybe there are other functions, similarity preserving, with similarity preserving purposes that can be used in here. But so in this case, seed vector that we learn is a bundle of bindings. And when we unbind, unbind any data, so it will preserve the distances relative to the ones used for in the update procedure.
Thank you.
Sure.
Time for one more, Evgeny?
Yeah, sure. As I said, I'm very interested in any feedback or questions, so shoot.
This is carrying on from the last couple of questions, which have been circling around your mention of manifolds. And there are really 3-dimensional spaces in this. You've got the dimensionality of your projection lattice, which in these cases is always 2-dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got the dimensionality of the data space, which in your early synthetic examples was tended to be 3-dimensional.
Yeah.
But you've also got the local dimensionality of the manifold within the data space that it's embedded in.
Yep.
And I'm just wondering if you've got any thoughts about the impact on performance of those 3 dimensionalities. The data embedding space dimensionality, the local dimensionality, the manifold within the data, and
it's a great question, and it's as I said, it's demonstrated even in this kind of figures. First of all, dimensionality is directly, the dimensionality of feature vectors affects the fidelity of the class separation. So what do I mean by this? So as you can imagine, this kind of 3-dimensional cases is trivial, right? So you take 1,000-dimensional vectors, so 3 items in 1,000 dimension is very accurate. So you can extract the individual symbols, right? But for example, this Engram Statistics is a different case. So in Engram Statistics operates over the capacity, way over the capacity. So you superimpose, whatever number of 3 grams you find in a given text. And then, obviously, the smaller dimensionality you use to represent this Engram statistics. So the smaller will be the scale of similarities between inside class samples and between and interclass samples. So this is one effect. And secondly, it will interplay with internal data dimensionality. So as you see, you don't know in advance, how the dimension of the data look like. So visually, it's actually very cool that this Hyperseed can give this opportunity. You see that, so this mass of points over here, it's not something bad. So that, well, definitely, at this point, it results in misclassifications, but this is an indication of yet another internal dimension, so which cannot be captured by this simple kind of projection mechanism. So that's why, I mean, that was the purpose of showing that, I mean, zooming in or just looking at this data separately would reveal its internal structure, and then in hierarchical manner, so you can discover different dimensionalities of your manifold. But at the same time, at least it's tricky. That's why I'm saying that, I mean, it's still work in progress to automate the process, so to understand the stopping criteria, so to say that, I mean, when enough is enough, so when the next level of hierarchy is enough. So so as you correctly noticed, so it's an interplay of these three different parameters. So the dimensionality of encodings and the inner dimensionality of the data.
Thank you.
Okay. So thank you for all these questions. So if you have any more questions, so please, you can speak now, or you can use our mailing list. So I will be happy to answer them all. So so let's see. Yes. So thank you for today, and see you next time.